The experience of becoming a mother in America nearly broke me. How do so many people in this country survive? And the truth is, what we don't say enough is many of them do not. We're killing mothers in America. So yes, in the end, there were objections to the cost. I don't accept that argument. When we need more bombs, we find the cash. Paid leave is really about the most important moments of your life, both the joy and the pain and the beauty and all of it. You do have power. Use your voice. Tell your story. What gives me hope is to see the generational change. So yeah, we hopefully we'll get it done, but if not, I know that our kids will.
Welcome to another episode of Skin Like a Rhino, the podcast by Elvie. In today's episode, I'm delighted to welcome Dawn Huckelbridge. Dawn has spent her career working in gender equity and policy change in the US and internationally, and most recently has founded the Paid Leave for All campaign. We'll be talking about why Dawn started this campaign and why paid leave for all is such an important policy change message for the US this year, in the context of the US being one of the only high-income countries in the world with no federally mandated paid leave, and where a shocking 1 in 4 new mums are back at work within 2 weeks. Welcome, Dawn. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
I'm very excited to talk about the Paid Leave for All campaign. But before we jump into that, I suppose I was looking at your background and see actually you and I have had quite similar careers in some ways working in policy analysis. You've even done your master's here at London School of Economics, LSE, in the UK. So I'd love to just hear a bit about, I suppose, what it was that motivated you to start working around gender equality and policy change in the first place.
Great question. Well, to be honest, it goes back. I am the youngest in my family. I have 3 older brothers. And I think even though it seems a little bit silly, I think that opened up my eyes at a young age to just gender dynamics, seeing how even in a very sort of progressive family, I felt like I was treated differently or I saw things differently. And then throughout as I was getting older and was in college, I got more politically involved, was really interested in learning more about international development and politics as well. I come from a multicultural family and was always really interested in learning about gender dynamics in those countries. But what was interesting, did some work abroad, studied about gender in other countries, worked to elect more women in other countries, and then realized, no, I got to go back home because the United States is actually so behind. And it's sort of, I don't want to say a lie that we're fed, but we have this idea that we have business telling other countries how to improve their gender metrics, and felt really strongly that, no, we need more work to do here.
It's so interesting. I mean, yeah, I think a lot of people having worked internationally come to that same conclusion. That was exactly the same for me too, like feeling I was spending time in, very poor countries in East and Southern Africa, giving advice on women's health, and then thinking they don't need this advice. They kind of know what they need to do. And actually there's so much work to be done at home as well. Right. But I mean, why is the US bad generally around, say, leave, or is it specifically bad for women's issues?
Well, I mean, I think there are a lot of issues that need work right now, particularly in this moment in our democracy. There's a lot of things that we're fighting for. But I will say we are behind on many things, including, most of all, the issue that I work most on, of course, which is paid leave. We are one of only 7 countries in the world that guarantees no form of paid leave for its people. And this means that 1 in 4 women have gone back to work after giving birth within less than 2 weeks. This means that only 1 in 4 working people have paid family leave through their jobs. And that every day in America, there are tragedies happening all over. People, again, going back to work days after having a baby, people missing their parents' last breaths, missing their own treatments. So that's what we're fighting for, is to change. I mean,
Dawn, but I love the fact you're even using the word fighting, because that's my question. Is like, it's the numbers are so shocking. Like, why is there not more protest about it? Right? We see a lot of protests, media attention to other women's health issues, for example, access to safe abortion and so on. But everything you're describing, from even for me, having worked in some of the poorest countries in the world, and you too, knowing that there it's shocking that women go back to work after just a couple of weeks, but to think that's happening in the richest economy in the world.
Yeah, I mean, this is our job. This is what we're trying to do, is sort of build the scale, to be louder, to make sure that more people's voices are heard, to make sure it's clear that this is a voter priority, that this is an election year issue. And also doing more to connect paid leave and these issues to things like reproductive freedom. Economic freedom, reproductive freedom go hand in hand. We're talking a lot about the fact that what is more important than, one, your ability to choose whether or not to have a family. And if you do, your ability to sustain one at all, your ability to care and support for one. So we're trying to do more to make these connections. I feel like in America, it took a long time for the political mainstream to understand that abortion is not only very important to most of us, the ability to, again, have bodily integrity, but also that it is politically motivating and politically winning. And I feel like they're finally on board, and we're trying to kind of catch them up on all of these issues that disproportionately impact women and families.
Yeah, and I was looking at the resources on your portal, and I do think you make that case very strongly, right? Because that's the point, right? That this policy change that you're advocating for has overwhelming support, particularly in some of those states where the political, swing is so important, right?
Yeah, we do polling all the time to try to exactly make this point. Most recently, at the very end of 2023, we went to all of the battleground states and found that support, I should say, first of all, support is consistently high. It's been in the 80s for decades. But right now it is at record highs in battleground states, 85% overall. And what's interesting is when you look, I would say, however you slice and dice those numbers, whatever voting blocks you look at, whatever demographics. We looked at everything from young voters of color to low turnout Gen Z voters to suburban moms. Every one of these blocks, it was at a record high. And no matter, actually, we asked the question in several different ways too, just to make sure, there's no bias here. We're not skewing the numbers. And I will add, it's consistent with a lot of third party and news polls as well. So it is high even with Republicans. 76% of Republicans supported federal paid leave. So this is something that voters get, that voters want, and we are trying just our best to connect the dots between them and the candidates and the elected officials who should be representing them.
And I'd love to talk more about actually what you have proposed. I know that in 2021 that very nearly came into law. But before we do that, I realised actually I think you and I have jumped in because we're quite familiar with the subject. And actually, just for anybody who's listening, could you just explain, particularly for those who are not in the US, like what is currently available in terms of paid leave, and then what are you advocating for?
Yes, good reminder. I always need to, because it's funny. It's not just any of us who could be confused. Even in Congress, they're often confused. So what we're fighting for is paid family and medical leave, which is simply the ability, if you or a loved one has a serious health condition, that you can take time off of work with a paycheck to care for yourself, to heal, to care for others. We are fighting for the bill that's in Congress. The Family Act would give 12 weeks of paid time, would ideally guarantee your job, make sure that you had a job to go back to, that you had insurance, all these things, and that you didn't have to worry about making the rent, going bankrupt. We've gotten feedback from folks about when I had a baby, I worried about losing my home. I lost all my savings. I lost every dollar in my bank account. And in the wealthiest country in the world, to your point, it's unconscionable. What we have right now is not much. We do have something called FMLA, passed a little over 30 years ago, which was meant to be a first step. And what it does is it provides workers with their job security. So it's unpaid leave. It gives 12 weeks for many different serious health conditions and caregiving purposes. But it only applies to actually about half of the workforce. There are a lot of carve-outs and exceptions.
And then what you're asking for, and then particularly in terms of new mums, right? Just understand that part, the maternity leave. So you're asking for up to 12 weeks paid and an employee rights to keep your job, come back to the same position. Nothing beyond 12 weeks.
I would like to have more than 12 weeks, but we feel like that's sort of what has been accepted as a minimum. And it was interesting, I will say, and I just want to add to, of course, I care. I'm a mother. I care about maternity leave. It's unconscionable that women go back to work while they're still bleeding, while they're still, not healed at all. But we're also fighting for it for everyone, whether you're caregiving for a parent or just a loved one, or you are injured, or you have a serious diagnosis. But I would love to have more than 12 weeks. But when we were fighting in 2021, it got negotiated down to 4 weeks. And I think there were some people, there was a question of, do we accept that? Is that unacceptable? And what I said was, how do I look a parent in the eye who has 0 days and say, we forfeited your ability to survive with 4 weeks. So we'd like a lot more, but we're fighting for as much as we can get.
Okay, so just so I understand, because in the UK we have carers leave, right, which actually is quite a recent act that everybody gets up to a week, which is actually unpaid, and that's for any type of caring, as you define it, so quite broad. And then separately, obviously, we have maternity and paternity leave. So yours is sort of combined into two, right? Which I get, because you need to, I suppose, is your sense if you've got one chance, you need to change it for all carers, not just for parents.
Right. So right now we're trying to get it for a self-medical, for family leave, which is broadly defined actually in the bill right now. It would be anyone that sort of is connected to you through mutual affinity, family, however you define it. Military deployment has been a part of it. So we're trying to be clear that every single one of us will need to give or receive care, and probably both. And these are circumstances that happen to all of us. And I would love to make progress in any one of them, but we all have these needs. So.
But I mean, is it right? You've been doing it since 2019. I mean, you've already made huge progress, even if in 2021 you got that close, one vote. I mean, just talk us through what happened in 2021 and, the amount of work that must have taken to get that bill so close to passing, and what kind of went wrong at the very last hurdle. I can't even imagine the heartache.
Yeah, I mean, I'm having little traumatic flashes looking back. No, I appreciate that. Thank you. I do like to remind people we made a lot of progress. In fact, we made more progress in a few years than we had in the 30 prior. So I don't want people to feel like this is impossible. This is some like moonshot dream. No, we were really close. We were one vote away. So after the pandemic, just shortly after we had launched actually this campaign, all of the organizations who'd been at the table fighting for the policy decided to launch something together to make it more powerful, to make sure they were not duplicating efforts and coordinating. And everything went into fast forward during COVID, because I think Congress finally got what it meant to be in a global pandemic in a country with no form of paid leave. So it's interesting. One of the very first things they did across party lines was pass a bill, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, that ensured a temporary provision of some paid sick days and some paid family leave.
Oh, right. So COVID basically brought about the first ever paid leave.
Exactly. Okay. The first ever federal law. And so it's interesting. It's like, we understand that this is a life-saving protection, but in America, we can only do it once crisis hits, when the reality is this has been a crisis in slow motion for years. But then it expired. I think our collective memory was very short, even though we know now from research how helpful it was, that it prevented more than 15,000 COVID cases per day. We know that it saved countless families and jobs. And in any case, it did expire. And so then we pivoted to fighting for a permanent law, saying no one should be scrambling like this again. We should be prepared, whether it is a pandemic or whether it is a cancer diagnosis or a new child, all of these things that were going to happen in your lives. And we came really close. It was in the president's plan. We had support. We thought we had the votes for quite a while. It was part of the Build Back Better Act. But we had one big hurdle, or there was many hurdles. There was many, stops and starts. It was in the package. It was out. It was a roller coaster. And the story I like to tell is that at the end of the fight, when we were pretty sure it was about to be cut, we'd planned a big action in DC where we'd flown in people from across the country, pulled together all of our, partner organizations, and we were going to have a sort of a speak out where everyone shared their stories at the Capitol. It was pouring rain. And we had this talk of, if it's cut, do we still do it? And we felt very strongly, no, even if it's a vigil, we feel like we want to honor all of the people who've been fighting for this. So for 8 hours, stood in the rain, people told stories of their dying children, of their partner, their wife with postpartum depression, of watching their parent pass away, just like very moving, powerful stories. And members of Congress, dozens of them joined. Some of them said, I've never said this publicly before, but I want to share my own story. And it was one of the most powerful things I've ever been a part of in advocacy. And I came home that night, we were all just exhausted and heartbroken, and got a call that paid leave was going to be put back into the bill. And so it did pass in the House of Representatives for the first time in history after that action. God bless Speaker Nancy Pelosi. So we came so close. We were one vote short.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was powerful. It was so powerful. And we say often paid leave is really about the most important moments of your life, both the joy and the pain and the beauty and all of it. And in America, uniquely, we miss those moments. And it doesn't have to be that way. So that's what we're close to getting. Again, we were one vote short in the Senate, Joe Manchin in West Virginia. So the package got changed before it finally passed. And a lot of the components helping women and families were cut out. But we feel like that is the great unfinished business that has to come next.
Right. And then in terms of why it got cut out, I'm assuming here, but obviously I might be wrong, is it because of what was seen as the perceived cost, the financial burden? And what is that financial burden, and how do you look at it in terms of, the other way around, the flip side, the ROI of investing in caring?
I love that question because you pointed out the return. Right. So yes, in the end, there were objections to the cost. I don't accept that argument because when we find money for the things we want to. When we need more bombs, we find the cash. And I think also, to your point, we don't talk about the cost of inaction. So yeah, to implement a national paid leave program would be in the hundreds of billions. But also families lose more than 22 billion each year without paid leave. I mean, the cost to an individual can be 100,000 or more over a lifetime. It can be, it can be devastating. The responses we got about losing my milk supply, losing my home, losing my business. Every case where we've looked at this in states that have programs, and there are now 13 plus the District of Columbia, we see a positive return. That it is actually helpful for businesses to have this because they retain their talented workers. Workers are more productive. There's higher performance and profitability. They don't have turnover costs, training costs. So in the end, this is something, and this is consistent, the ROI. And we found that. So it's very short-sighted to feel like we don't want to put the money up to build something so powerful and transformative.
Yeah. No, and I know what it's like. And I've seen you talk about that, really this is a tool for health, growth, economic growth, and also racial equity. I'm sure you also said gender somewhere in there too. I'd love to just sort of unpack some of those in terms of the ROI. We've talked a bit about the economic side. What about that health side, and particularly maternal mental health, right? Which I know is also, I think, an issue that's sort of close to you. I think I'd heard that. Isn't that also part of why you felt that you needed to launch this campaign? I mean, I'm also one of those women who just thought I was going crazy after I became a parent, but at least I had financial security because of the leave provisions in the UK.
Well, I love, you just got our main talking points down. So paid leave is a tool for public health, for economic growth, and for equity, racial and gender equity. You're exactly right. So not to go too deep, but we have so much research. We have piles of it about how this helps the health of the mother. In the US, we have one of the worst maternal mortality rates in the world, which is unbelievable, particularly for Black women. We know that paid leave would help infant mortality. We know it would help with mental and physical health of whole families, whole communities. We also know that if we pass paid leave with other sort of caregiving policies, that it would yield millions of jobs, billions in wages, and trillions in GDP. And for equity, if you even just think about it in a personal sort of level, if you knew that you would have paid leave, no matter where you worked or where you lived, to think about how that would open up life possibilities, career trajectories, it would reduce pay gaps, it would increase retirement, there'd be more promotions, there'd be more peace of mind, there'd be more security, it would level the playing field.
Hi everyone, Tania here. Just a quick favour. We'd love your feedback. If you have a moment, it would be great if you could give us a star rating. It helps others to find our podcast and means we can continue to get brilliant guests for you. Now, back to the good stuff. Because just in case anybody who's listening isn't aware, in terms of racial equity, do you want to just talk me through why it's so important for that as well?
Yeah, well, I think there are gaps in access. I mean, if you think about the kind of quality jobs and how they fall across society, if you think about the kind of benefits, there is a very complex and often tragic history of racism and caregiving, even going back to slavery and beyond. So much of the burden of caregiving, both, paid, formal and unpaid and informal, has fallen on largely on Black women, but also, women of color, immigrant women. And it's been undervalued or unvalued since the beginning. And I think that has a lot to do with the delay in progress on this issue. Is if you look at the things that have been deprioritized throughout our history, politically and policy wise, it is women, and it is women of color in particular, who have come up last. So to have a policy that guarantees some form of valuation for that work is going to change the country.
And if and when we start seeing more sort of diverse representation in government, is that going to help change things as well? Is that your view?
Absolutely. Yeah. The two goals I've had in my career are to elect more women in the United States, particularly a president, and to pass paid leave. And I think they're very connected. When you've lived these experiences firsthand, suddenly you get that they are not just urgent, but that they're an economic imperative. And to your question about me, I often say, I worked in these issues, studied them for years, but it wasn't until I became a mother that I also got what a crisis this is in this country, because I felt it personally. And I hear this from so many people, particularly women who give birth, but it's the same for people dealing with a parent dying or dealing with any kind of real health crisis. When I became a mother, I was lucky because I had some paid leave. I didn't have enough, and I had to use every paid sick day, all my vacation. I had all of these resources. I had a supportive family. My parents came to help. I had health insurance. And I still felt like the experience of becoming a mother in America nearly broke me. And I felt from the second I gave birth, all of a sudden, just unseen, unvalued, disrespected in the hospital, in the workplace, everywhere. And I had a difficult child. I'm lucky he was healthy, but that kid did not sleep. For a year, he did not sleep. I did not stop moving, holding him, walking, pacing.
Now I'm getting traumatic flashbacks.
Well, yeah. And that's what we don't say enough. Even if your child is healthy, it is not easy becoming a parent. And especially if you are expected to stay attached to work in some ways, to go back to work too soon. I know I have these so many traumatic memories of pacing all night and, tears coming down my face, and then putting on high heels and grabbing all those bags of pump parts in the morning and hearing him screaming for me. And because he had this horrible colic and he just could not stop screaming, and running out the door, running home from the Met show, it was just, and the lack of sleep for a year is really hard. And I just kept thinking, if it's this hard for me with one child, with all of these resources, how do so many people in this country survive? And the truth is, what we don't say enough is many of them do not, both economically or literally. We're killing mothers in America. A lot of the maternal mortality, that numbers include deaths in the days following childbirth. It's not just during the act. And a lot of it is because I think, and we're trying to get research done on this as well, is that they don't have time to heal or to get the care they need.
In the UK, I think we're talking a lot about matrescence at the moment. Matrescence, about how it's not just the burden of us caring for the newborn baby, but also we as women, changes are continuing to happen to our own bodies. It's also with hugely fluctuating hormonal levels that we have issues with mental health post-birth, and we ourselves need to be cared for. It's not just us as a carer.
Well, that's something I'm actually working on a book about, because it's shocked me how it's not just about, paid leave to me is sort of like the minimum. It's the minimum we should give new mothers. And the rest of the world, which I'm sure you've looked at too. I mean, in France, they have free pelvic floor therapy. In other countries, there's much more of this culture and practice of rest and care for the mother and sort of honoring the mother and, helping her physical recovery. And it feels like in the United States, we just don't even talk about it. It's invisible.
I mean, by the way, the pelvic floor health support in France, that was the inspiration for me starting LV, because our first pelvic floor trainer. Yeah, my partner's French, and I was like, when I was pregnant, and nobody was talking about our bodies or anything, and I learned about pelvic floor health, and he was really shocked that we didn't do anything in the UK. So that's why I started the company.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, it is fascinating. And I love the fact you're using a lot of language like urgency, crisis, fighting, because you need to create that real sense of urgency. But I
Yeah.
could also imagine it's quite challenging, right? Because, I mean, for example, if you came to the UK, if anybody came to the UK and took away our paid leave, everybody would be protesting on the streets. But to do the opposite of getting people to protest for something they've never had is actually harder, right? I suppose there's a real education aspect.
You're exactly right. And that I think has been, I would blame sexism, racism, all kinds of obstructionism in this country for our delays. But I think also you're right that it's always been seen as that sounds good. It's nice to have. Polling was always high, but what was interesting is it wasn't until the pandemic that I think people sort of viscerally understood, oh no, this is urgent. This needs to be a priority. And we're trying to educate people to understand, to take the silver lining of that and to say, this still applies. This is still a crisis. And when it comes to your door, you'll understand it. So we're doing what we can both through the data and also through the storytelling and trying to reach people on that personal level and to understand this is a fight that impacts you too. We have 13 states and the District of Columbia that have passed some form of paid leave laws. And again, we do applaud it. I where we can, we help. We don't want to step in others' lanes, but we do want to be helpful and supportive and make sure that people understand this does add to the momentum. It adds to the narrative. But exactly to your point, there are states that will never do this. There are businesses that will never do the right thing as well. So if we only do this piece by piece, if we only try to pass this at the state level, we are already this country, as I'm sure you well know, of haves and have-nots. There is not really one sort of universal standard for benefits, for protections. There's not much in terms of a social safety net that applies to all of us. And we must have that. We must have that because we all do better when we all do better.
On the state by state, I was just sort of thinking, is there a connection between the states that have passed laws and their position on access to abortion services?
No, they're absolutely connected. And that's why I'm increasingly trying to put this into our messaging. None of the states that have passed total abortion bans have paid leave. And I don't think that's shocking. And if you look at many other metrics of family support or health, the states that have passed these bans are falling behind on all of them. So it is very much, it's hypocritical, obviously. It is not about health. It is not about family. It is about control. I think that most of us understand that. So we're trying to say both. You cannot have a reality of forced birth in this country and then say there's nothing we're going to do to support life after birth. And we should all have the freedom to decide again whether to have a family and how to support it. I mean, I think it's very clear that if this was truly about life, that we would be making sure that babies had food, that we were making sure that they had homes, that we were making sure they were healthy, that we were doing we were providing access to contraception, all these things. But instead, I think it is very clearly about controlling women and is about preserving sort of a political status quo that honestly is changing. And I think what we're seeing is the last gasps of white supremacy and patriarchy in this country. Demographics are changing and you can only do so much to fight that.
And is the control aspect also linked to not having paid leave? If by not having carers leave, you're disproportionately affecting women, that's not an accident. And what's the aspect of control in that? Is it keeping women in archetypal, stereotypical roles or?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of people in this country who have power, who believe that women should not share it with women, that women do belong in the home. They shouldn't be able to go back to work. And, they shouldn't necessarily even have economic freedom or independence. I think, it sounds funny to say it, but it is absolutely true when you look at the political decisions people make.
I'd love to just hear a little bit about the close for paid leave that you ran earlier this year, because I know obviously Elvie were involved and also the more recent Get Your Shit Together. But maybe starting with the close for paid leave.
Yes, we were so grateful you were a part of that. I will give credit to a friend and consultant who came up with the idea. And I'll be honest, at the beginning I was a little skeptical. I was like, let's try it. Absolutely. I don't know how many businesses will do it. And what was amazing is immediately dozens did, and said, "You got it. I'm on." And sometimes we were just DMing on Instagram people. It was a lot of reaching out to friends and contacts, but also just cold outreach. And it gave me such hope, because we often say, like, oh, paid leave is not a business imperative. It's bad for the economy. And so to show very clearly that the opposite is true was just so powerful. So yes, we had, the idea was to get businesses to close for a day in support of a federal paid leave program, because people often misunderstand this. It would not say you have to fully pay for this, you must do this. It would be a program administered by the federal government. There's different ways you can pay for it, but it would help relieve the overall costs across the board. And it would support businesses. So we had, I think at the beginning, we had more than 70 businesses who signed on. It was really cool to see throughout the day that more just kept jumping on board. I would start seeing the graphic across, my feed, and I was like, "Oh, great, welcome!" So I think I think it was close to 90 or 100 by the end of the day, different businesses, large and small, who got on board, and it was really amazing to see how viral it went, the social media reach, the press interest. The number of outlets that got on board, everything from business outlets to women's outlets to kind of mainstream political outlets. So it was one of those moments that I see often throughout this campaign that tells me we're going to win, because there is excitement and passion and people want to be a part of it.
There's so much excitement, like you said, from women themselves, from families, from men, from whoever, and then also from businesses themselves. And then now it looks like you're breaking through at the political level as well. How about the Get Your Shit Together? That's also a fun campaign.
Yes, I love it. So we've had this great partnership with Glamour for over a year now. Just became good friends with the executive editor, who had a similar story about sort of her postpartum experience, and just became really passionate about trying to help the effort and get this done. So they've done a number of little projects, a number of partnerships with us, but we produced in also partnership with a production company, sort of satirical baby books called Get Your Shit Together, Baby.
I saw them. They're so funny. They look like real baby books. I was like, it's a baby book. And I was like, they're swearing to babies. And then it took me a while to realize.
They fabricated real books. And we've talked about actually putting them out for sale. And so the idea is, in a country where parents have to go back to work within 2 weeks, the baby has just got to learn to fend for itself, So the baby, learns to puree, and the baby learns to, cook and pay the bills and all these things. But the idea was to do something, to use a little bit of comedy, a little bit of dark humor. And we did a sort of take over a Times Square and did a big celebrity story time campaign, and another sort of exciting moment that I'm hoping all of these little things that help keep awareness, keep momentum going, and channeling it towards political power is gonna help get this done.
I'm sure it will. And I think I read somewhere that you're hoping that this year might be the year that you bring in the change again. But I'm guessing with election dominating everything, it must be incredibly hard. Are you hoping maybe next year, or what's your sort of sense on what you're looking to achieve in the next 12, 18 months?
It all comes down to elections. And to your point about politics, so it depends if we have enough paid leave votes in 2025, but that would be the earliest opportunity would be next year. So doing whatever we can to make sure that paid leave stays in the center of the election year narrative, that we're putting the accountability, the incentives, the pressure on candidates and electeds to be listening again to their constituents, to be recognizing that this is unfinished business, this is a political priority, this is a must get done. And our hope is, so it depends for anyone listening. It depends on who you vote for.
It's so important. I can't actually believe, in some ways, it's 2024 and I don't know. I still find it completely befuddling that the US doesn't have this place. And I'm not saying it, I'm just saying it as in it is just so crazy. Like you said, from a gender equity point of view, from an economic, social, health point of view, it really is, it's urgent and it is a crisis. So, what can if people are also listening and getting kind of as angry as you have been, and I'm beginning to get on this particular for the US right now, what are things that listeners can do?
So easy things, you can follow Paid Leave for All. We're on most of the platforms. I need to be better at TikTok, but we're on the platforms. You can follow us because we do try to put both updates on what's happening in Congress and across the country there, and then also ways that you can get involved. On our website, we have a take action button at the top with 2 clicks. You can contact your own representatives. So would love for you to follow us. But also, I think, again, it's really important that you make sure all of your elected officials and the candidates running to represent you understand that this matters. You do have power. I think it's easy to believe. Sometimes we don't. But the offices, they count the number of calls they get on issues, the number of emails. And when an office is flooded with incoming on an issue, it's noticed. So we will try to make easy tools for you to do that. But it's important. You do have power. Use your voice. Tell your story. You can even just tweet at your electeds, use their handles, make sure that they hear from you. And there will be some upcoming moments where we will be reaching out on social media and giving you direct ways to act.
Dawn, thank you so much. But before I let you go, the podcast is called Skin Like a Rhino. I can only imagine, even from what you've described, that there must have been many moments where you had to really dig deep. I don't know if there's any particular moment where you had to feel like you had to develop Skin Like a Rhino, possibly, I'm guessing also where people were telling you, no, this wasn't going to work, or you felt like you just wanted to give up, and what it was that kind of helped see you through that.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite stories. But I will say I feel the same energy from you. I don't think we're women that give up easy. But so the story I described when we were standing in the rain for 8 hours, sharing stories, I came home and I have this delightful son. The colicky baby turned into, thank God, the most delightful son. And he is probably Paid Leave's second biggest fan. And he saw me crying. And he said, Mama, what happened? He used to ask every day, did they cancel Paid Leave? Did they cancel Paid Leave today? And I had to say to him, baby, yeah, today I think they canceled Paid Leave. And he said, well, our prayers, the prayers that we do at night is say thank you for something, take care of someone. He said, we're really missing something in our prayers. You need to add, what do we hope for? And he said, we're going to say every night. And it's every night, literally since that day, he has done this. He says, I hope that we will pass Paid Leave. And he said, literally, I was crying in the living room. And my 8-year-old, 7-year-old son, I forget now exactly how old he was, he said, don't you give up. You get back up. We're going to hope and we're going to keep fighting. And so, God bless him. That really kept me going.
I mean, Dawn, you're doing amazing work and you will get there. I know you will. And you're already doing so much. And everything that we are all doing, all us women who are fighting for better rights for us, it's also for the next generation, not just for women. And I also see that in my children, like things that we haven't got right now, I'm pretty hopeful that they're going to not put up with a lot of the shit that we're putting up with right now. I mean, my daughter's like, she watches a program now. She's like, but I don't understand. Why are the women not fighting in that war? And I'll be like, I don't know how to explain this.
Yeah, I mean, that is what gives me hope, is to see the generational change. So, we hopefully we'll get it done. But if not, I know that our kids will.
Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Dawn. And I look forward to collaborating further with you and the amazing campaign, and let's all hope, and not just hope, like you said, we need to fight for this. Thank you, Dawn.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Skin Like a Rhino. If you enjoyed the episode, please take a moment to leave us a star rating. Your feedback means the world to us and helps others discover the podcast. Until next time.